What if everything you've been told about being an empath is actually holding you back? I know that might sound harsh or even unbelievable. For much of your life, you've probably been told you're too sensitive, that you need to toughen up, set boundaries, or somehow become less of who you are. The internet is overflowing with advice about protecting your energy, building emotional shields, and surviving as an empath in a difficult world. But what if I told you that Carl Jung, the renowned Swiss psychologist who introduced concepts like the collective unconscious and psychological types, had a completely different view of highly sensitive individuals? What if your empathy isn't a burden to control, but a strength to refine and master? In Jung's private practice in Zurich, he worked with hundreds of individuals who would today be considered empaths, artists, healers, mystics, and deeply sensitive souls who felt overwhelmed by their emotional depth. Yet Jung never regarded their sensitivity as an illness or weakness to overcome. Instead, he saw something revolutionary. He described these individuals as possessing what he called a differentiated feeling function, a refined psychological capacity that, when properly developed, could become one of the most powerful tools for understanding human nature and fostering genuine healing. Before we go deeper, if this message connects with your personal journey, please like this video and subscribe for more transformational insights. Your support helps spread this message to others who need it. Jung didn't describe empaths as we do today. He didn't see them as mystical beings cursed with heightened sensitivity. Instead, he viewed them through a psychological lens, practical, profound, and deeply human. In his groundbreaking 1921 work, Psychological Types, Jung explained the feeling function as one of the 4 primary ways humans interpret and engage with the world. And here's what's remarkable about his perspective. He believed that your sensitivity isn't a flaw, but a sophisticated instrument of perception. The real issue isn't that you feel too much, it's that no one ever taught you how to use this sensitivity with clarity and strength. Think about it. Have you ever entered a room and instantly sensed the tension between 2 people pretending everything is fine? Or found yourself absorbing the emotions of everyone around you like a sponge? Or perhaps felt drawn to those who are emotionally wounded even when it leaves you drained? According to Jung, this isn't random. It's your psyche functioning exactly as it was meant to. You're not broken, oversensitive, or cursed. You're expressing a dominant psychological function that, when understood and integrated, becomes a powerful tool for transformation and healing. But Jung also recognized something crucial. In modern culture, people with a dominant feeling function often underdevelop their analytical, logical side, what he called the thinking function. This imbalance means they feel deeply but lack the tools to interpret and manage what they experience. That's why empaths often feel overwhelmed in crowds, exhausted after social situations, or confused about which emotions belong to them. It's not because they're too emotional, it's because they haven't learned to balance their deep feeling with clear thinking. Jung found that when empaths strengthen their thinking function to support their feeling function, everything changes. They shift from being victims of sensitivity to masters of it. They learn to feel deeply while remaining centered within themselves. But here's the catch. Every strength, when left unbalanced, becomes a weakness. Every gift, when not integrated with its opposite, turns into a burden. Jung's insight reminds us that true mastery lies not in suppressing sensitivity, but in developing balance. So empathy becomes not a drain, but a source of power. For empaths, there's a hidden side of your psyche, one you've likely been taught to fear, suppress, and reject. Jung called this hidden side the shadow. It isn't your enemy, it's your greatest untapped strength. Let me tell you about Jayla, one of my clients who struggled for years with the intensity of her empathy. She was a nurse who could feel her patients' pain so strongly that she often returned home physically drained and unwell. She tried every method she could find: protection rituals, shielding meditations, boundary exercises, but nothing provided lasting relief. Through our sessions, Jayla realized that her shadow held the very traits she'd been conditioned to see as unempathetic: assertiveness, the ability to say no, healthy self-interest, even appropriate anger. She had avoided these traits for fear of becoming like the detached professionals she once criticized, but in doing so, she had rejected essential parts of herself. When Jayla began integrating her shadow, learning to be assertive yet kind, to set boundaries while staying compassionate, her empathy evolved. It stopped being a burden and became her greatest strength. She could still sense her patient's pain, but now she transformed that awareness into effective, caring action instead of personal suffering. By the end of this journey, you'll understand how to make this same shift, how to feel deeply while standing confidently in your own psychological space. More importantly, you'll discover that the very traits you've tried to suppress, your assertive, grounded side, are the key to your empowerment. This isn't about becoming detached or hard-hearted. It's about becoming whole. It's about unlocking a level of psychological resilience that few ever access. It's about evolving from what Jung called an unconscious empath, someone who feels everything without understanding it, into a conscious empath, who feels deeply and responds wisely. Are you ready to uncover the hidden power you've carried all along? Let's begin by dismantling a few myths that have held you back. The modern empath movement, though well-meaning, has created a story that unintentionally disempowers sensitive people. You've been told you're psychic sponges, constantly absorbing negativity, always in need of protection from toxic people and situations. You've been cast as victims of your own sensitivity, but have you noticed that the more you focus on shielding yourself, the more overwhelmed you become? Have you wondered why none of these protection techniques seem to offer lasting peace? What if the very foundation of this belief system is flawed? Jung would have found this both fascinating and troubling. In his extensive work with highly sensitive individuals in Zurich, he observed something very different. What we now call empaths, he found, are simply people whose psychological makeup is dominated by the feeling function. And this isn't mystical, it's observable, understandable, and most importantly, workable. What's truly groundbreaking about Jung's perspective is that he didn't view sensitivity as something to be shielded from or controlled. Instead, he regarded it as an advanced psychological capacity, one that, when developed properly, becomes a powerful tool for understanding and navigating human relationships. In Jung's model, there are 4 core psychological functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. Every individual has one dominant function, one auxiliary, and 2 that largely remain unconscious. When feeling is the dominant function, a person interacts with the world through values, emotions, and the pursuit of interpersonal harmony. But here's the key insight. Jung identified 2 forms of the feeling function: extroverted feeling, which focuses on external harmony and the emotional atmosphere of groups, and introverted feeling, which is inwardly oriented, guided by personal values and subtle emotional nuances that most people overlook. If you identify as an empath, chances are your dominant function is introverted feeling. This means you experience life through a deep emotional awareness. You don't merely observe emotions, you evaluate, process, and integrate them in ways that most people cannot. For instance, when you walk into a room and immediately sense tension between 2 people who appear perfectly fine on the surface, you're not being psychic. Your introverted feeling function is interpreting what Jung called inferior function projections, the unconscious emotional signals others are trying to hide or suppress. Your psyche detects micro-expressions, tone shifts, subtle energy mismatches, and body language cues at a level beyond your conscious awareness. This is why you often understand someone's emotional state before they do. Your feeling function works like a finely tuned emotional radar, picking up signals invisible to most. Consider this again. When you walk into a room and feel something's off, it's not intuition in the mystical sense. It's your psyche analyzing subtle human cues automatically. Similarly, when you absorb the pain of a friend who's suffering, it's not a curse of hypersensitivity. Your psyche is performing its natural role, creating deep empathic resonance that enables profound understanding and even healing. However, Jung warned that this remarkable capacity comes with a risk unique to people with a dominant feeling function, a phenomenon he called feeling type inflation. This occurs when one becomes so merged with the emotions of others that personal boundaries blur. You begin to lose the distinction between your own feelings and those of the people around you, eventually believing you're responsible for everyone's emotional state. When you start sacrificing your own needs, boundaries, and well-being to keep peace or heal others, it's a familiar story, isn't it? Jung saw this pattern repeatedly throughout his work, and he recognized something that modern empath advice often overlooks. The answer isn't to shut down emotionally or build walls. The real solution lies in integration, in becoming whole. Jung's insights went even deeper. He noticed that individuals with a dominant feeling function often develop what he called an auxiliary thinking function as their secondary one. This means that your natural empathy can find balance through cultivating logical analysis, objective judgment, and rational decision-making. This isn't about ignoring your emotions or turning cold and detached. It's about fostering what Jung described as conscious cooperation between your feeling and thinking functions. When these two aspects work together, transformation occurs. Your empathy becomes insightful. Your compassion gains wisdom. Your sensitivity turns into strength. Imagine this for a moment. Instead of being consumed by every emotional encounter, you're aware of what's happening and deliberately choose your response. Instead of taking on others' pain, you offer genuine support without feeling responsible for fixing what's beyond your control. This is what Jung meant by psychological maturity for feeling types. It's not about dulling your sensitivity. It's about mastering it. Within you exist the very traits needed to bring harmony to your empathic nature, traits you may have rejected or suppressed. There's a side of you that's assertive, boundary-driven, even self-focused when required. A side that can say no without guilt, that chooses when to connect and when to step back. Society has conditioned you to fear this part, teaching that anger is unspiritual, boundaries are selfish, and self-prioritization makes you like those you avoid. But Jung realized a deeper truth. What you resist persists. What you repress doesn't vanish. It sinks into your unconscious and subtly begins to rule your life. Here's something that might surprise you. Jung believed that the people who trigger you most are often your greatest teachers. Not because they're beneficial to you or deserve tolerance, but because they reflect parts of your own psyche you've disowned. Think about it. Do you find yourself repeatedly attracting the same types of people? The narcissist who exploits your kindness, the victim who expects you to fix their problems, the energy drainer who leaves you exhausted. Jung would say these aren't coincidences. They're mirrors of your unacknowledged inner material. The narcissist might reveal your repressed ability for healthy self-focus. The victim may highlight your own reluctance to take responsibility. The energy vampire could mirror the unspoken neediness within you. This doesn't justify staying in harmful relationships. It means that until you integrate these rejected aspects of yourself, you'll continue to encounter people who personify them. This is why you continue attracting the same draining relationships. This is why you often find yourself giving more than you receive. This is why your empathy, instead of empowering you, has turned into a source of fatigue. The traits you've been rejecting, your ability for healthy self-interest, rightful anger, and firm boundaries, aren't contradictions to your empathetic nature. They're the missing pieces that can make your empathy truly strong. Carl Jung referred to these rejected aspects of the personality as the shadow. For empaths, Integrating the shadow isn't about becoming less sensitive. It's about becoming consciously and confidently sensitive. It's about evolving from an emotional victim into an emotional warrior. However, what many people misunderstand about Jung's shadow work is that its purpose isn't to eliminate the shadow or to achieve perfection. The goal is to form a conscious relationship with every aspect of your psyche. This means acknowledging, understanding, and integrating the parts of yourself you've been conditioned to deny. For empaths, this involves developing what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing qualities in conscious harmony. You can be both compassionate and boundaried, generous and appropriately self-focused, open-hearted and discerning. This isn't about balance through compromise. It's about accessing your full psychological range, allowing you to respond to life from wholeness rather than from a limited version of yourself. Now, let's explore Jung's most profound concept, the shadow. It's crucial to understand that your shadow isn't evil. It's not a dark force battling your light. It's not something trying to corrupt your empathic heart. Your shadow is simply the collection of all the traits you've been taught to suppress, reject, or deny. For most empaths, the shadow holds what Jung called the unlived life, the qualities that oppose your self-image as a gentle, giving, peace-seeking person. Jung explained, everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. For empaths, this shadow often includes anger, self-prioritization, the strength to say no, and the courage to walk away from what drains you. You've been conditioned to believe these qualities are wrong, that anger is unspiritual, that selfishness is immoral, that boundaries make you no different from the narcissists you try to avoid. But Jung understood that suppressed qualities don't vanish. They retreat into the unconscious, subtly influencing your choices and relationships, and that is precisely why you keep attracting the same kind of draining connections. This is why you often find yourself giving your energy to people who exploit your kindness. It's why your empathy can feel more like a burden than a blessing. Let's talk about what Carl Jung described as shadow possession, a phenomenon he frequently observed in empaths. When you suppress your darker traits for too long, they don't simply disappear. Instead, they start to surface unconsciously, often at the most inconvenient times. Have you ever snapped at someone after months of patiently absorbing their emotional needs? Or felt sudden resentment toward those you genuinely want to help? Maybe you've experienced an emotional breakdown where all your suppressed feelings erupt at once. This isn't a personal failure or a sign of spiritual weakness. It's shadow possession. It's your unconscious mind's way of restoring balance by forcing you to confront the parts of yourself you've been denying. Jung noticed this pattern repeatedly in his practice. Many healers, therapists, and caregivers came to him feeling ashamed of their anger or resentment toward those they cared for. They couldn't understand why these negative emotions existed alongside their desire to help. But Jung recognized that these emotions weren't problems. They were signals. The psyche was communicating that something within was misaligned. Here's an example. Jung once worked with a woman devoted to caring for her elderly mother. She prided herself on her patience and compassion, yet secretly battled resentment, fantasies of escape, and even fleeting wishes for her mother's death. She believed these thoughts made her a bad person, selfish and unloving. But Jung helped her see the truth. The problem wasn't her thoughts, but her refusal to acknowledge her own exhaustion and longing for freedom. When she began accepting these shadow feelings, recognizing her resentment while still choosing to care, and her need for independence while remaining committed, something profound happened. The intrusive thoughts faded. She could now feel her emotions fully and act from conscious love rather than suppressed obligation. Consider this. Have you ever felt irritated by someone who seems selfish or self-absorbed? A co-worker who never asks how you're doing, or a friend who always talks about themselves? You might think, how can they be so inconsiderate? Jung would call this a shadow projection. The trait that frustrates you most in others often reflects an unacknowledged part of yourself. In this case, you may have repressed your own healthy capacity for self-focus and labeled it selfishness in others. Here lies Jung's brilliance. He didn't see irritation as a flaw, but as insight. He wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That self-centered person you can't stand, they're mirroring something your psyche wants to develop, the ability to value your own needs. Without guilt, they often mirror something your shadow wants you to. Learn how to take up space and how to occasionally center your own experience." Let me share a story about a client I once worked with. Let's call her Maria. Maria was a textbook empath, always prioritizing others' needs, constantly available for friends in distress, and highly sensitive to the emotions around her. She came to therapy feeling drained, frustrated, and puzzled about why she kept attracting people who were overly dependent and demanding. Through shadow work, Maria discovered that what bothered her most about these people was their sense of entitlement, the belief that her time and energy were always accessible. Yet as we delved deeper, she realized she had never developed a healthy sense of entitlement herself. She hadn't learned to value her own needs as much as those of others. The people who triggered her weren't merely difficult. They reflected a missing aspect of her self-advocacy. In their exaggerated way, they demonstrated the very quality she needed to integrate, the belief that her needs and boundaries were equally deserving of respect. This is what makes shadow work so transformative for empaths. Rather than repeatedly attracting and resenting people who display disowned parts of themselves, empaths can consciously integrate these traits. Integration doesn't mean becoming what you dislike. It's not about being selfish or inconsiderate in return. Carl Jung's idea of integration is about balance, accessing these traits consciously and using them appropriately. When Maria integrated her shadow, she didn't turn selfish or demanding. Instead, she developed what Jung described as conscious selfishness, the ability to honor her own needs as equal to others. She learned to say no without guilt, to ask for help when necessary, and to care for her well-being without feeling that she was betraying her empathic nature. Here's what's remarkable. Once Maria embraced these shadow qualities, the overly needy people in her life either adjusted their behavior or drifted away naturally. She no longer attracted people who acted out the assertiveness she had previously disowned, because she now embodied it herself. That's the essence of shadow integration for empaths. Instead of reacting to others' behavior with frustration, you begin to approach it with curiosity, asking what it reveals about your own hidden patterns. This ties directly to one of Jung's key insights about empaths. He observed that highly sensitive people often experience what he called enantiodromia, a Greek term meaning running to the opposite. This refers to the tendency of any psychological attitude, when taken to an extreme, to eventually flip into its opposite. Have you ever noticed this in yourself? You keep giving, absorbing someone's pain, supporting them through one crisis after another, until one day you suddenly feel resentment. You might even distance yourself completely, shifting from full empathy to total emotional withdrawal. This isn't a flaw in your character. It's your psyche's natural effort to restore equilibrium. Your shadow, the part of you that seeks protection, is trying to step in, to save you from complete self-neglect. But because these protective qualities haven't been consciously integrated, they surface in unconscious and often destructive ways. Jung made a fascinating discovery about this process. He found that empaths who swing between deep giving and sudden resentment are actually closer to psychological integration than those who remain in constant self-sacrifice. The mind is trying to correct itself, to bring awareness to the neglected shadow aspects. Here's where Jung's insight becomes truly profound. He didn't see these emotional fluctuations as flaws to be fixed, but as valuable opportunities for conscious growth. Each surge of resentment, each spark of anger, each impulse to withdraw, these aren't signs of moral failure. They're invitations to explore the unseen dimensions of your personality. Every empath holds a powerful tool, the ability to consciously integrate their shadow. This means intentionally developing a relationship with the parts of yourself you've been taught to suppress or fear. For empaths, this often involves embracing what Jung called the inner warrior, the aspect of you that can set boundaries, protect your energy, and prioritize your well-being without guilt. Jung described this as cultivating appropriate selfishness, the healthy ability to value your own needs equally with others. It's not about becoming distant or indifferent. It's about achieving what Jung called individuation, psychological wholeness and balance. It's about drawing upon your full range of inner resources rather than living from only one side of your personality. When you integrate your shadow, something transformative happens to your empathy. It stops being passive absorption and becomes an active, conscious choice. Instead of feeling drained by others, you begin to feel energized through mindful connection. Instead of attracting wounded individuals who rely on you to fix them, you start forming healthy, reciprocal relationships built on mutual respect. But Jung emphasized that shadow integration isn't a one-time realization. It's an ongoing practice known as active imagination, the conscious engagement with unconscious material. For empaths, this means routinely checking in with the parts of themselves they've long ignored. Jung developed methods for this, and one particularly powerful technique for empaths is called dialogue with the inner figures. This involves intentionally conversing with different aspects of your psyche, treating them as distinct personalities with their own insights and viewpoints. For instance, you might envision your inner empath as a wise, nurturing healer and your shadow as a strong, grounded warrior, each offering wisdom the other lacks. Rather than viewing these inner aspects as opposites, Jung encouraged his patients to let them communicate. You might ask your inner empath, "What do you need to safely express your gifts?" And then turn to your inner warrior. How can you protect and support the empath without closing off the heart? This kind of inner conversation allows you to access the wisdom of both sides instead of relying on just one. That's the true secret. Not some mystical ability, but the courage to become psychologically whole. It's about embracing the parts of yourself that your upbringing may have taught you to deny. Now let's get practical. How do you integrate your shadow? How do you move from being an emotional sponge to becoming what I call a sovereign empath? Someone who feels deeply yet chooses consciously. Jung created specific tools for shadow integration, and I'll share the ones that are especially effective for empaths. But first, remember, this isn't a quick solution or a weekend exercise. Shadow integration, as Jung described it, is the work of a lifetime. Even small efforts in this direction, however, can create meaningful changes in how you experience your sensitivity. The first method is what I call the daily shadow check-in, adapted from Jung's active reflection practice. Each evening, spend about 10 minutes asking yourself, what emotion did I take on today that wasn't mine? What part of me does this reflect? What quality in the other person triggered me the most? Here's an example. Imagine spending time with a friend who constantly complains about their job, relationship, or family. You leave feeling exhausted and annoyed. During your shadow check-in, you might realize that what really bothered you was their victim mentality, their refusal to take responsibility for their situation. Here's the key step. Instead of judging them or yourself, ask, what part of me does this reflect? You might find that you too have areas where you feel powerless or stuck. Perhaps you've been avoiding actions that could improve your own circumstances. Maybe you've complained about being overly sensitive instead of taking charge of your empathic strengths. This isn't about criticism, it's about awareness. It's reclaiming the energy you've spent judging others and channeling it toward your own growth and integration. The second method is active imagination, customized for empaths. Find a quiet place and visualize your shadow as a distinct figure. For many empaths, this image might appear as a warrior, a professional, or someone firm and confident, perhaps even a little intimidating. Instead of rejecting this image, Jung encouraged his patients to engage it in dialogue. Ask your shadow, what do you want me to understand? What do you need from me? How can I honor your strength without losing my compassion? It might feel odd at first, but Jung found that when the shadow is approached with respect rather than fear, it becomes an ally instead of an adversary. Your inner warrior doesn't seek to destroy your empathy, it aims to protect it. It wants to help you decide when and how to engage emotionally. So you're not overwhelmed by every situation. One of my clients, Gila, discovered through active imagination that her inner warrior was teaching her an important truth. Saying no to some people is actually saying yes to those who genuinely deserve your time and energy. This warrior aspect of her wasn't selfish, it was discerning. It understood that her empathic gifts were valuable and should not be wasted on people who would take without gratitude or reciprocity. The fourth technique draws on Jung's concept of active imagination, applying it specifically to relationship dynamics. When you find yourself in an emotionally draining interaction, instead of rushing to fix the other person or internalize their emotions, pause and ask, what part of my own psyche is this person mirroring? What quality do they express that I've been hesitant to develop within myself? This doesn't mean staying in toxic relationships or justifying poor behavior. Rather, it's about using these experiences as insight into your own psychological growth. For example, a person who never returns your emotional support might be showing you the importance of allowing yourself to receive care. A friend who often cancels plans could be reflecting your own discomfort with disappointing others when necessary. One of the most transformative practices Jung suggested for empaths is a conscious boundary setting. This isn't about building emotional walls or shutting people out. It's about cultivating what Jung called differentiation. The ability to tell the difference between your emotions and those of others. Here's a simple exercise. The next time someone shares their struggles with you, take 3 deep conscious breaths before responding. Ask yourself, is this my emotion to carry? How can I show compassion without assuming responsibility for their situation? How can I support them authentically while remaining grounded in myself? This practice nurtures what Jung referred to as conscious love, the capacity to care deeply without merging unconsciously. It's the difference between empathy and codependency, between compassion and emotional entanglement. Jung also highlighted the value of holding the tension of opposites. For empaths, this means intentionally practicing both empathy and detachment, giving and receiving, openness and boundaries. The goal isn't a fixed state of balance, but the ability to move fluidly between emotional positions as each moment requires. Finally, Jung emphasized the power of ritual in integration, not protective rituals, but what he called individuation rituals, practices that affirm your journey toward psychological wholeness. Create simple daily habits that honor both your empathy and your autonomy. Perhaps it's journaling each morning for 10 minutes, asking, how do I want to show up in the world today? What qualities do I want to embody? How can I honor both my sensitivity and my strength? Or maybe it's a walking meditation, where you practice active imagination, consciously engaging with different parts of your psyche, asking your inner empath what it needs and your inner warrior, how it can best protect and support that sensitivity. The key lies in consistency and awareness. Jung believed that the psyche responds best to regular, mindful attention. Small, daily practices that reaffirm your dedication to inner wholeness are far more effective than occasional intense efforts to fix your sensitivity. But here's the essential insight. As you integrate your shadow, your empathy doesn't fade, it evolves. You shift from being a passive absorber of emotions to an active healer. Instead of being exhausted by difficult people, you learn to maintain your center while still offering genuine support. This transformation unfolds gradually, yet its effects are deeply significant. You begin to notice that you're no longer unconsciously taking on every emotion around you. You start choosing when and how to engage empathically. This is what Jung referred to as conscious compassion, the ability to feel deeply without losing your psychological balance. You start attracting different kinds of relationships. Rather than drawing wounded individuals who rely on you to fix them, you connect with people who value your gifts without exploiting them. Instead of feeling accountable for everyone's emotions, you discover the peace of mutual, balanced care. This, Jung explained, is individuation, becoming your true self rather than the version others expect. For empaths, individuation means developing sovereign sensitivity, conscious compassion, and empowered empathy. You're no longer the same person who began this journey. Something essential has changed in how you perceive your empathic nature. You've realized your sensitivity isn't a weakness to control, but a refined psychological instrument to master. Imagine your life now as an integrated empath, someone who embraces both light and shadow, someone who has achieved psychological wholeness. You still feel deeply, perhaps more deeply than before, because you're no longer afraid of your own emotions or others. Yet now, you feel by choice, not by compulsion. You can enter a tense room, sense the emotional current, and decide how to respond. You might offer calm presence, guide a healing dialogue, or simply hold space without taking ownership of others' healing. Sometimes you may recognize that a situation isn't yours to engage with, and you remain grounded while keeping your heart open. This is the essence of shadow integration. Your inner warrior doesn't make you less compassionate. It makes your compassion more intentional, effective, and sustainable. You've learned to love without losing yourself, to give without draining yourself, and to care without self-sacrifice. Those around you have noticed the change. The energy vampires who once depleted you have either evolved or drifted away, no longer drawn to the healed version of you. You're no longer trying to mend your wounds by fixing others. You've become a clear mirror instead of a distorted reflection. Now, you attract healthier relationships, people who respect your empathy without exploiting it, who reciprocate care rather than just receiving it. But there's a fascinating truth about this transformation. Jung found that when empaths integrate their shadow, they often experience what he called the emergence of the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposite qualities in conscious harmony. To be both soft and strong, open yet boundaried, giving and receiving. This isn't about compromise, it's about wholeness. This idea centers on accessing what Jung called both-and thinking. Rather than living in the trap of either-or, you don't have to choose between being empathetic or being strong. You don't have to lose your sensitivity to establish healthy boundaries. It's entirely possible to be deeply compassionate and powerfully self-governed at the same time. Let me tell you about David, a client who beautifully embodied this transformation. David, a social worker, came to therapy because he was emotionally exhausted from constantly absorbing his client's pain. He felt guilty for wanting to protect himself, believing that true compassion required suffering for others. Through shadow work, David discovered that his shadow didn't just hold his limits, it contained wisdom about sustainable compassion. His inner warrior wasn't trying to harden him or make him indifferent. It was showing him how to care in a way that could last. Once David integrated this aspect of himself, his entire approach to work shifted. He could still connect deeply with his clients' emotions, but stopped carrying their pain home with him. He developed what Jung referred to as professional love, the ability to care profoundly while maintaining clear awareness of roles and responsibilities. Remarkably, David's clients began healing faster. When he stopped unconsciously taking on their burdens, they were challenged to build their own capacity for healing. His balanced empathy became a catalyst for their growth, not a reinforcement of dependency. Your journey in the world can evolve this way too. Whether or not you work in a helping profession, you can become what Jung called the wounded healer. Someone who transforms personal pain into insight and guides others without sacrificing well-being. Your empathy turns into both a professional strength and a personal superpower. You no longer shrink yourself to ease others' discomfort or apologize for feeling deeply. You recognize that your sensitivity is a gift when used consciously and wisely. This, Jung explained, is individuation, becoming who you truly are rather than who others expect you to be. For empaths, that means being both sovereign and sensitive, powerful and compassionate, conscious and connected. But here's an essential truth. Individuation isn't an endpoint. It's a lifelong process. The shadow work you've begun is just the start. As you evolve, new layers of the shadow will surface, inviting deeper integration. This isn't a burden, it's a gift. It means your capacity for emotional depth and psychological awareness keeps growing throughout your life. Every challenge, every tough relationship, every surge of emotion becomes a chance to expand your consciousness. Jung believed that people with a dominant feeling function, empaths, hold a unique role in humanity's evolution. In a world that prizes logic over intuition and achievement over healing, empaths restore equilibrium. But this happens only when they operate from wholeness, not woundedness, when they wield their sensitivity as a conscious strength, not a source of victimhood. Your journey doesn't end here. In fact, it's just beginning. Individuation, Jung said, is the work of a lifetime, a continuous unfolding of integration and self-realization. Shadow work is the foundation. Dive deeper into Jung's teachings. Read Man and His Symbols to understand how your psyche communicates through dreams and images. Explore the archetypes and the collective unconscious to uncover the patterns shaping your emotional world. Consider working with a Jungian analyst or joining a dream group to continue this integration. Most importantly, trust yourself. Trust that your sensitivity is not a weakness, but a precise tool the world urgently needs when it arises from consciousness, not from pain. Your empathy is a powerful instrument for healing, transformation, and authentic connection. The great empaths of history all discovered the same truth. Real strength doesn't come from suppressing emotion, but from integrating every part of yourself so you can feel deeply while standing firmly in your own inner ground. Your secret weapon isn't mystical, it's profoundly human. It's the courage to be fully yourself. Light and shadow, thought and feeling, empathy and boundaries, all working in harmony. And Jung offered one final insight worth remembering. The goal of personal growth isn't just wholeness for yourself, but what he called service to the collective unconscious. That means using your integrated awareness to help heal humanity's shared pain. As an integrated empath, you become a bridge between the conscious and unconscious, able to perceive, sense, and understand what others cannot. This ability is not too much for the world. It's exactly what the world needs. Those who can feel deeply, connect authentically, and foster healing are essential to our collective evolution. But this must come from conscious choice, not unconscious compulsion. Welcome to your identity as a sovereign empath, someone who wields sensitivity as a deliberate force for transformation, both personal and collective. Welcome to the integrated life Jung envisioned, a life of wholeness, awareness, and deep humanity. Your secret weapon was never hidden. You've simply learned how to use it.